Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. We are just getting everything set up for the webinar, and we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Hi, thanks everybody for joining. This is Karen Sullivan from Community Vision. We are going to wait a few minutes just to see if a few more people are able to join the webinar. So we will probably be starting around 3:05. So thank you for joining. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's workshop. Today, we will be talking about the San Francisco Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. The two presenters today, I am Karen Sullivan. I'm the co-director of consulting, and I'll be presenting along with Jessica Townsend, who is a consulting program analyst at Community Vision. This is an overview of our agenda for today. We're going to start out by just giving a brief introduction of who we are at Community Vision. We'll talk about the NSI program, and then some of the specific programs within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. So the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, which includes acquisition grants, the Space Stabilization Program, which includes grants and technical assistance for organizations entering into leases with a term of 3 years or more. And then the Community Cornerstones Program, which is a new program within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, specifically for organizations that are leasing commercial space within 100% affordable housing developments. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions if anyone has questions. Just a technical issue, if anyone has any issues hearing either Jessica or I today, feel free just to send us a note through the webinar and we'll check to make sure that we're talking close enough to the microphone. So here on this slide, we have an overview of Community Vision. Community Vision is also a nonprofit. Our mission is to promote economic justice and alleviate poverty by increasing the financial resilience and sustainability of nonprofits and enterprises. And so we meet our mission through 4 different programs. We have a consulting program, which is where Jessica and I both sit. The focus of our consulting practice is to help organizations learn how to use their resources, whether it's financial resources or real estate, strategically in a way that helps them maximize their impact. We have a lending program that provides flexible financing to nonprofits and social enterprises that are serving communities lacking access to capital and opportunities. We have a policy program that advocates for policies that are aligned with our mission. And then we also serve as a conduit for individuals to make socially responsible investments into the community. Here we have an overview of the services that we offer in the consulting practice. Our services, whether it's helping an organization figure out whether or not they can afford a higher lease payment, or providing an analysis of an organization's historic financial performance. All of our services are really geared at helping organizations make strategic decisions about their resources that maximize their impact. So to give you some context, the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative was launched in 2015, and the goal of the initiative is to help nonprofits secure new nonprofit-owned space and create solutions for organizations seeking long-term leases. We are currently in the 4th round of funding for this program. The Sustainability Initiative is funded through the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and it's implemented in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and the San Francisco Arts Commission and other key partners. Community Vision acts as the administrator of 2 of the programs within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. So we administer the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program and the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, which we'll be talking about today. So here we have some statistics on the impact of the program to date. So in the 4 rounds, we have awarded $7.2 million in acquisition grants to 10 nonprofits to support the acquisition of 108,000 square feet of new nonprofit-owned space. Through our financial assistance grants, we've been able to award $1.9 million to 39 nonprofits who were able to occupy over 199,000 square feet of commercial space. And through our technical assistance program, we have been able to provide services to 45 organizations that were either at risk of displacement, so they had a lease that was terminating within the next 18 months, or facing barriers to growth. In terms of eligibility across all of the programs within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, these are the 3 core eligibility requirements. So in order to be eligible for any of the services, organizations need to be either a 501c3 nonprofit organization or a fiscally sponsored project of a 501c3 organization. The organization needs to be located in San Francisco, and it has to have a 3-year track record of providing services to low-income and historically underserved communities within San Francisco. So on this slide, this is just a really basic overview, but we wanted to give you a sense of each of the programs within the Sustainability Initiative and where they sit and what the requirements are. In the next few slides, Jessica and I are going to go into a little bit more detail about the application process and some of the requirements. But this is an overview just to get us started. So within the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, there is one grant-making program. So there is an acquisition grant pool. The purpose of those grants are to support the acquisition of new nonprofit space. And so, for instance, if a building is being acquired from an existing nonprofit, that project would be ineligible to apply for a grant because it's not creating new nonprofit-owned space. In order to apply at the time the application is submitted, which would be February 4th, 2020, an organization needs to have either a fully executed letter of intent with the owner of a property specifying the terms of the acquisition, or a fully executed purchase and sale agreement. The acquisition needs to be able to close escrow by November 1st, 2020. And so we're really looking at projects that are going to be able to move forward on a relatively quick timeline and utilize the funding. For this program, a consultation call is required with myself, Karen Sullivan, at Community Vision prior to the submission of an application. And the application deadline for this program is February 4th, 2020 at noon. Within the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Fund, we now have 2 different grant-making programs. So there is general financial assistance, which is available for nonprofits that are facing permanent displacement or barriers to growth. So in order to be eligible for these grants, at the time of application, you need to be able to submit a fully executed letter of intent for a space that you intend to lease, or a lease with a commencement date on or after September 1st, 2018. The leases all need to have a term of 3 years or more for this program. If awarded funding through the financial assistance program, organizations need to be able to request reimbursement for eligible expenses by February 28th, 2021. So when you're thinking about your timeline and when you're going to move into a building, factoring in the fact that all expenses related to furniture or professional services or tenant improvements for that space would need to have been incurred by that February 28th deadline in 2021. For this program, the application deadline is also February 4th at 12 o'clock. Our new grant-making program that we have within the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Fund is the Community Cornerstones program. So these grants are specifically for nonprofits that are leasing space within a 100% affordable housing development. Similar to the financial assistance grants, in order to be eligible to apply to this program, at the time of application, an organization would need to have a fully executed letter of intent with the nonprofit developer or a fully executed lease. Similarly, the funds need to be dispersed by February 28th. For this program, a consultation call is also required just because it's a new program, and we want to make sure organizations understand the requirements and that we have a sense of the pipeline. And so those consultations will take place with Jessica and myself. You can shoot either of us an email to schedule one. And the application deadline for this program is also February 4th at noon. And just to clarify, for the general financial assistance grants, we don't A consultation call is not required. However, if organizations have any questions, you can feel free to contact Jessica or myself at any time with any questions that you might have. And then the last service that we have available through the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Fund is technical assistance. And so this assistance is available to organizations that are facing permanent displacement, which we define as a lease expiring within the next 18 months or a month-to-month lease, barriers to growth due to their real estate, or an organization that is in negotiations for a lease within a 100% affordable housing development. Applications for this program are accepted on a rolling basis. We'll talk about the services a little later in the presentation, but basically an organization would get paired with a consultant at Community Vision, and we would develop a scope of work that addresses any real estate related questions you have related to the project. Okay, so across all of the programs that we just discussed, there are some core program priorities that we have outlined here on this slide. And so throughout all of the programs, during the review criteria, priority will be given to applicants that meet each of these 5 program criteria. I'm not going to go into detail here on each of the 5 program priorities because within our program guidelines, we have a lot of detailed explanation about what documentation can be provided to show alignment with these priorities. But I think one thing that we do like to highlight here is that if your organization is considering applying to one of these programs, thinking about your alignment with these priorities will help you get a sense of how your application may score. In order to apply, you certainly don't need to meet all 5 of the priorities, but the more alignment you can show with each of the priorities, the stronger your application is going to score. So now I'm going to go into a little more detail on the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. So within this round, $2.2 million is available to support the acquisition of new nonprofit-owned space. The maximum grant award is sized at the lesser of $1 million or 25% of the acquisition cost. And when you're thinking about acquisition cost, this is before any of the soft fees that you might have related to an acquisition. So it's just what you're paying to the owner for the building, not any additional fees that you might have for legal or a broker that you may use for the transaction. In terms of baseline program requirements, as I mentioned, in order to apply, organizations do need to have a fully executed letter of intent or a purchase and sale agreement. If your organization has recently purchased a building, you could be eligible to apply if that purchase transacted after June 30th, 2018. The grant proceeds, as I mentioned, need to be dispersed by November 1st, 2020. And an important component of this program is that if grant funding is awarded at the time the funds are dispersed, there is a 30-year compliance period tied to the grant. And so there is a deed of trust and use restriction recorded on the property, limiting the use of the building to a nonprofit use. And this is something that we like to talk about organizations with because it sometimes can impact the way there can sometimes be an impact on how the grant needs to be documented in order to be adaptable to some of the other project funding sources. And so during the consultation calls, we like to talk about this requirement, what it means to the organization, and also what the implications could be if funding were awarded on other funding streams that are expected for the project. Within the application, we do also require a board resolution confirming that the board has read through the program guidelines, understands this requirement, and authorizes the organization to move forward with the application. The last day to schedule a consultation call is January 13th, and the calls must be completed by January 17th. If your call was not completed by January 17th, we cannot, an organization, you are not eligible to apply to the program. So it's really important to get that call set up and completed if you're considering funding or applying for funding through the program. And once an application is submitted, on this slide we have an overview of the grant review criteria. So when the applications are being reviewed, the first criteria that's looked at is the project and organization's alignment with those 5 program priorities that we showed on the prior slide. After that alignment is assessed, the next thing that is assessed is the extent to the projects is meeting an urgent need. And so when we think about urgency, we are thinking about what is the real need for this grant, and were it not for this grant, would the project be able to go forward? Another thing that's looked at is what is the impact of this grant on the organization's long-term financial sustainability and programmatic performance? So is the acquisition going to enable your organization to either serve more clients or improve your financial performance over the next few years? And finally, the last thing that's assessed is project readiness and organizational capacity. And so here are some of the things that are looked at, which are different components of the application, are who are the people on the project team, what is their experience with completing similar projects. For instance, if construction is a component of the project, has an architect been identified? Has the organization begun thinking about who they might engage to be a general contractor? These members of the team don't need to be in contract at the time of application, but having a plan for engaging those people and bringing them onto the team is going to help make a stronger application. Another component of readiness is a 3-year operating projection, which is also a required component of the application. And here, what the selection committee reviewing the applications is going to be looking for is, has the organization contemplated all of the costs associated with owning this building and incorporated it into their operating expenses? If a loan is a component of the project financing, has the organization incorporated payments of principal and interest into the projections? And also, do the projections include contributions to a capital reserve to account for any repairs or maintenance needs that may come up over the next few years? If a component of the project is a capital campaign, having a plan for that campaign is another document that could be added to the application that would help demonstrate project readiness. You don't necessarily need to have a capital campaign feasibility study, but having a plan for either obtaining a capital campaign feasibility or a plan for engaging donors and raising the gap funding that's needed would help to build a stronger application. All right, so now we're going to go through a few different examples of potential projects and talk through some eligibility issues. And so in this example, an organization is planning to acquire a building for $8 million. The property needs to be renovated and construction costs are estimated at $2 million. So the total budget is $10 million. And the question here is, how much is this organization eligible to apply for? And the response is $1 million. So the grant would be sized based only on the acquisition price. It's not the total project budget. So of that $8 million, this organization is eligible for the lesser of $1 million, or 25% of the $8 million acquisition price. And so even as your acquisition price gets higher, the grant amount is going to be capped out at $1 million once you get over that $4 million threshold. Okay. Another example here we have is an organization is in discussions to acquire a building. The owner of the building is interested in selling the property, but probably won't be able to finalize a letter of intent by the February 4th application due date. The question here is this organization eligible to apply? And unfortunately, no, even if an organization is like well into conversations with the owner of a building without a fully executed letter of intent outlining the terms of the sale, an organization would not be eligible for the program or allowed to submit an application. We have seen groups that get right up to the application deadline, and sometimes some groups are able to get that letter of intent. Some groups haven't been able to secure a letter of intent. We always encourage organizations, no matter where you are in your negotiation process, if you're thinking about this funding source as a possibility, definitely schedule a consultation call, because it ensures that in the event that those conversations do progress to the point where you're able to get that fully executed letter of intent, that you're able to access the funding. Okay, and our final example here is an organization purchased a building in September of 2018. The acquisition was financed with debt equity and a short-term bridge loan from a board member. So this organization is in a building. The building's been placed in service. And the question is, are they eligible to apply? And the answer is yes. With this grant, we do have a look-back period. And so if your building was purchased after June 30th, 2018, you would be eligible to apply. I think we would definitely, during that consultation call, want to talk through the specifics of the acquisition, but that could potentially be an eligible project. Okay, so that's our summary for the acquisition grants through the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. In this next section, we're going to be talking about the Community Cornerstones program. So in this program, $2 million is available, and grants of up to $350,000 are available to organizations that are entering into a lease with a term of 5 to 10 years. Grants of up to $500,000 are available to organizations considering a lease with a term of 10 years or more. And just a reminder, for this program, these leases need to be for spaces located within 100% affordable housing developments, and they also need to have a nonprofit sponsor. So you need to be negotiating with a nonprofit for the commercial space in that building. As we mentioned, for program requirements, organizations at the time of application need to have an executed lease or letter of intent with the nonprofit developer. There's a 5-year lease term minimum. And as I mentioned, all the projects need to be located in 100% affordable housing developments. For this program, consultation calls are also required, so you can shoot either Jessica or I an email, and we'll schedule a time to talk through your project and the timeline. And in those calls, it's also just a great opportunity for us to see if there are any eligibility issues that we can address in advance to ensure that an application is being submitted for a project that's going to be eligible for funding. And as I mentioned before, all expenses related to the grant would need to be incurred by February 28th, 2021. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. In this program, the only eligible use of funds is tenant improvements. And so Jessica is going to talk through some of the requirements and implications of the funding.
So for prevailing wage, there are several different steps that need to take place. And this is just a brief overview. We have a lot more detail in the OEWD bidding guidelines that are on our website. For prevailing wage, the first step is to develop your plans, develop the plans and specifications that are needed in order to complete the work in your space. Once the plans are developed, you're going to create a bid manual. The bid manual ensures that the details of the project are clearly and consistently communicated to all would-be bidders. It also ensures that the bidders understand their responsibilities and the legal requirements associated with the project. Community Vision has all of the documents that are necessary to create the bid manual. So if you are in the process of starting up a search at this time, you can feel free to send me an email and I can provide you with that documentation and give you any help you might need. Once your bid manual is prepared and you're ready to start asking for bids, you're going to post your project in the newspaper. We have some specific contacts, some specific information for individuals you can contact in order to have this information posted in the correct area. Again, I have that and can provide that to you if you need it. This is required for all projects that have a project budget in excess of $100,000. So in order to acquire bids, the newspaper posting is one element. Another element is you can have an option of either doing an open house where you have several bidders walking through the space, or you can send via email or post or fax your bid manual to any contractor that you are interested in receiving a bid from. Once you have acquired all your bids and selected a contractor, the next step is to draft and sign a contract with all the appropriate addenda. The contract should be in AIA format, and this is a standard format that most contractors already use, and we have a sample AIA contract for your reference if needed. The contract also needs to include attachments such as the project budget, the project schedule, and certain provisions. And again, the full guidelines have the full list of what needs to be included. So this may seem forward, the creation of the seems straightforward, but we've seen contracts that didn't have the appropriate addenda. And when that happens, the contract either needs to be re-executed or we need a separate email confirmation from the contractor agreeing to the extra addenda. It takes a lot of time and it brings up a lot of questions and confusion that could be settled beforehand when you're still discussing the project initially. So please be sure to reach out to us for the proper contract addenda as needed. The final step at this stage would be to register your project on the California Department of Industrial Relations website. This step needs to happen within 5 days of signing the contract, and it's a step that's completed by Community Vision once we receive certain information from you. And so please contact me as soon as you have signed your contract so that we can go ahead and get your project set up. We need to do this in order to generate a specific project ID that is needed to generate documents that will be needed for reimbursement. So once you have selected your contractor, the contract's been signed and the work is completed, and you're ready to be reimbursed for the cost of the work, these are the elements that you will need to send to us in order to secure reimbursement. So again, just wanting to point out that these grants are provided on a reimbursement basis. You will need to pay the contractor out of your organization's own funds before you can request your grant funds. The first thing you will need to provide when requesting reimbursement is the bid manual. This is something that you should already have since it's one of the first steps in the process. And so if it has not already been provided prior to the reimbursement request, please provide it at that time. You'll also need to provide a fully executed copy of the construction contract. Again, it needs to have all the relevant addenda that are included. You'll also need to provide canceled checks showing that the payment to the contractor was completed. Please note that this is not a copy of the check. A canceled check is an image showing that the check was cashed. It can be acquired from your bank, and usually you can print it yourself from your transaction detail page. You'll also need G702 invoices that are signed by the contractor and the architect. This is a specific standard invoice format that is used by contractors, and I also have a copy of this if you would like to see a sample of what one looks like. Certified payrolls are also required and need to be signed by the person who prepared them. These come from the contractor and are generated through an online system called LCP Tracker. The certified payrolls show what each worker was paid so that we can confirm that it was compliant with the wage determinations that would be acquired in the beginning of the process. And this is where we come back around to that Department of Industrial Relations project ID that we talked about before. That project ID is required in order for certified payrolls to be generated. And that is why it's so important for us to get your project registered ahead of time so that there aren't any delays or issues when the contractor goes to try to generate the certified payrolls. The last thing we'll need is an expense report. This is a specific document that I will provide at the time when awards are announced and grant award letters are sent. It's just a document where you can write down the exact expense that you're requesting reimbursement for, and you can provide that to us along with all of the other documentation. So if you have any questions about these, you can please give me a call. I know it's a lot of information, and so we're happy to go over these things at a later time individually as needed.
Yeah, and as you're thinking about your projects, I think if funding is awarded or if you're thinking about funding that may have these requirements, definitely reach out to us because it seems like a lot of information, but Jessica has a lot of experience with the program and can help provide examples of documents and contact information to help make the process a lot easier for your organization, because we want to make sure there is a lot that needs to go into it, but I think having the information available to your organization and your contractor, if you have a project manager, having a project manager with experience with this is just going to help the process go much more smoothly. Okay, so here we have an overview of the review criteria for Community Cornerstones. It's very similar to the review criteria for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. The first thing that the selection committee reviewing the applications will take into consideration is the program's alignment with those 5 program priorities. The committee is also going to look at the length of the lease term and the options, and it's going to consider the urgency of the project. And so in thinking about urgency, here the selection committee is going to be thinking about the project's timeframe. So is the organization going to be able to access the funds by the February 28th, 2021 deadline? Is there a real need for this funding? Is this in the project budget? Like, is there going to be a gap that this funding is going to help fill and be able to move the project forward? And then what is the impact of this project going to be, similarly to the investment fund, on the organization's financial and programmatic performance? And we have questions throughout the application and that ask for the applicant to describe how its programmatic performance is going to be impacted by the project. And for this program, we also do require organizations to provide an operating projection that will illustrate the financial impact of this project on the organization's budget. And then finally, similarly to the investment fund, the last thing the selection committee will be considering is overall project readiness. A difference here is that in the application, we are going to be looking at both the readiness of the developer, so their ability to move forward and develop the building and the housing, and also the applicant and their capacity and readiness to be able to move into the space and place it in service. And so in thinking about the applicant's organizational capacity, we're really looking at similar things to the investment fund. If there's a construction component, has the organization begun thinking about a contractor, an architect, a project manager to help move that project forward? If there's a funding gap for those tenant improvements, what is the strategy for filling that gap? And what are the commitments that have been raised to date? All right, so we have a few examples here for Community Cornerstones. In this example, a nonprofit has a letter of intent with a nonprofit developer for a space in a 100% affordable development that was placed in service in 2017. And the question is this organization eligible to apply to the program? And unfortunately, no, the organization is not eligible to apply. In order to be eligible for the program, the housing development that the commercial space is located in needs to be in either pre-development or construction. And in addition to that, it also needs to have received a funding commitment from the city and county of San Francisco. And so for buildings that have already been placed in service, the commercial spaces within those buildings would be ineligible for funding. Okay, and in this example, we have a nonprofit who has a letter of intent with a base term of 5 years and a 5-year option to extend. The question is the organization eligible to apply for a grant of up to $500,000? And the answer here is no. The organization is eligible to apply. We'll amend that sentence there. The organization is eligible to apply, but the lease, in order to be eligible for a grant of up to $500,000, the lease would need to have an initial base year term before options of 10 years. And so in this instance, the organization would be eligible for one of the grants of up to $350,000. Okay, and this is our last example. So in this example, a nonprofit was awarded funding from Community Cornerstones and assigned a contract with their selected contractor without following the prevailing wage process. So at the time they begin requesting reimbursement, they have already entered into contract and have not followed those procedures that Jessica just discussed. And the question here is, will these construction costs be eligible for reimbursement? Unfortunately, as Jessica mentioned, no, the organization's construction costs at this point would not be eligible for reimbursement under Community Cornerstones. Any costs that are incurred without having followed the entire process won't be eligible for reimbursement, even if the contract was executed before the organization was awarded a grant. And so if your organization is at a point where you've already entered into contract with a contractor, and you meet all of the other requirements, I think definitely give us a call so we can talk it through. There may be a way to still make it work, but that's something to definitely address before you get started on the application. And Jessica is available to talk through those questions. Okay, so that's it for Community Cornerstones. This is our last grant program. This is the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Financial Assistance Grants. So in this pool of funding, there is $415,000 available. Grants of up to $50,000 will be available to organizations with leases of 3 to 4 years. If your organization is able to enter into a lease with a base year term of 5 years or more, you could be eligible for a grant of up to $75,000. As we mentioned, at the time of application, you would need to have site control. So there would need to be either a letter of intent or lease that had been executed. If you are already in your building and your lease was executed on or after September 1st, 2018, you may be eligible for the program. If your organization fits into this category, definitely reach out to Jessica or myself to talk through what you would think about requesting the grant funds for, because as Jessica will discuss later, if your organization didn't follow some of our bidding requirements, some of these expenses that you incurred may not be eligible for reimbursement. So we definitely want to talk that through with you to see what funding you could be eligible for. And finally, if funding is awarded, funds are awarded on a reimbursement basis. And so the purchases need to be made prior to receiving the grant proceeds, and the grant needs to be fully dispersed by February 28th, 2021. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, who's going to talk about the eligible uses of grant funds under this program.
So when considering your project budget, these are some of the expenses that you can think about that would be eligible. The first expense is the rent stipend. It covers the rent differential for up to 6 months for the displaced square footage. And so we have an FAQ on our website that has several examples of how to calculate a rent stipend based on displaced square footage. It's a calculation based on the square footage of your original space and not necessarily the the new square footage of the new space. For furniture, fixtures, and equipment, these purchases would be for one-time expenses related to the move, not for ongoing program needs. Any FF&E request needs to have a minimum of $10,000 total. And it's important that if you're renewing your lease at a space rather than moving to a new space, your application must demonstrate how the purchases would allow you to accommodate more employees or clients served in the space. For professional services, these are services that are related to the move and do not touch the space. So if it's something that touches or changes the space, such as IT work that affects the wiring in the walls or the flooring or the lighting or anything like that, that is work that would be subject to prevailing wage and would be considered tenant improvements. But if the work is something like IT configuration, where it's just computer setup or server configuration, that would be considered a professional service. If you have questions about any of the services that you're considering and whether or not they would be considered a professional service or a tenant improvement, please contact me. I can go ahead and review that with you and we can get that figured out. Staffing costs are also an eligible expense. This is specifically staffing costs related to the move. So any time spent searching for new spaces or arranging the logistics of the move, purchasing your FF&E, that sort of time. Moving expenses are also eligible. These are things like moving vans or independent contractors or vendors who assisted with the move. These expenses are subject to the same professional services guidelines that were mentioned previously. And again, we have fuller details on the OEWD bidding requirements that are on the website. And finally, there are the tenant improvements. And so that we discussed that in detail earlier. Again, it's only for grantees that have a 5-year lease, and it's subject to the prevailing wage process. So once your expenses have been decided upon, at this time, you would need to then go into the disbursement request process. So before you have made your purchase, the first thing you want to do is your bidding. So you need 3 quotes and community vision approval before purchasing FF&E and professional services. This is required even if the purchases are made before the grant was awarded. So if you are currently in the process of purchasing items or engaging professional services, please reach out to me to obtain pre-approval now so that if in the event you are awarded a grant, your expenses will be eligible for reimbursement. Again, prevailing wage is required for all TI projects. For staff time reimbursement, some of the documentation that we need are payroll and timesheets that show what the employees were paid and that the employees were registered present on the days for which the organization is requesting reimbursement. We also have a template spreadsheet that organizations can use to organize their information, and that will be sent out at the time that awards are announced and award letters are sent. If you're also requesting reimbursement for benefits, in addition to payroll, we will need to see a benefit statement from the company showing the specific costs for the relevant individuals. And if you're requesting payroll tax reimbursement as well, we'll need to see evidence of what the payroll taxes are. And if that information is already present on the payroll document that was provided, then we just need some sort of explanation of which numbers on that payroll record are being used to calculate what the payroll tax costs are. And regarding the NSSP grant review criteria, it's very similar to what is the case with Community Cornerstones as well as the NSIF program.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, so We have about 10 minutes left and we want to leave some time for questions. So we have some project examples here that I'm going to go through pretty quickly. So in this example, the question is, what is the eligible rent stipend amount for a project? The old lease was 1,000 square feet. The new lease is 2,000 square feet. And in terms of eligibility, the point of this question is that the organization is only eligible to receive a rent stipend for the displaced square footage, so that original 1,000 square feet that it occupied. And the rent stipend is calculated based on the increase in the price per square foot. So were the price per square foot to have decreased, this organization would not be eligible for a rent stipend. So we have detail on the calculation here. If you have questions, reach out to us and we're happy to talk through you more about your project and what your rent stipend eligibility might look like. In this example, an organization has a letter of intent. That letter of intent includes information on the square footage of the space, the term, and the address. And so the question here is, would these components be enough to suffice the letter of intent eligibility criteria? And the answer is no. In addition to the terms listed above, the letter of intent would also need to include the proposed price per square foot. And if funding were awarded to this organization when the lease was ultimately executed, the price per square foot would either need to be the same or less than what was proposed in the letter of intent. And then finally, in this example, an organization is negotiating a 2-year lease with a 1-year option. The question is the organization eligible for an NSSP grant? And the answer is unfortunately no, because the base year is less than 3 years. The organization is ineligible for the program. So the base year of the base term of the lease needs to meet that 3-year minimum. So as we mentioned, under the space stabilization program, there are also technical assistance services available. On this slide, we have an overview of what the eligibility is for the general technical assistance. So either being at risk of displacement or facing barriers to growth. We also have technical assistance specifically for organizations that are negotiating leases in 100% affordable housing developments, and that technical assistance is available through the Community Cornerstones program. The services that are provided to organizations eligible for either of these programs are listed here on this slide. But basically, once an application is submitted, if the application is approved, a consultant from Community Division would meet with your organization to talk about where you are in your real estate project and what gaps we can fill. That could be financial planning. It could be helping you look for different sites throughout the city if you're thinking about a move. It could be helping you think about your potential funding sources or putting together an operating projection for the new site if there's going to be a significant increase in square footage that you need to figure out how to fund. On this slide, we have an overview of some of the key deadlines to keep in mind. The last day for scheduling a consultation call is January 13th, and those calls need to be completed by January 17th for both the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund and Community Cornerstones. The last day for asking questions is also January 17th at 5:00 p.m. If questions are asked after this date, feel free to shoot us emails, but we can't guarantee that we will be able to get you a response prior to the application deadline. All applications for grants are due February 4th at noon. It's important. We want to highlight that no late submissions will be accepted. We have had organizations who encountered some technical difficulties. We encourage you to submit your application before that February 4th deadline. If you encounter an issue and it's a day or two before the deadline, generally Community Vision will be able to help you navigate that issue and submit your application. If it's 5 minutes before the application is due, there is most likely nothing that we will be able to do to help you, and your application will not be submitted or reviewed by the selection committee. The target announcement date is March 26, 2020. And for the technical assistance program, those applications are accepted on a rolling basis and are generally approved within 45 days. So again, here's our contact information for Jessica and myself. Reach out to us with any questions that you have about any of these programs, and we're happy to talk through your questions with you. In addition to the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, Community Vision also operates a site called Spaces for Good. This is a real estate listing service for spaces that could be available to lease either on a long-term or short-term basis for nonprofits. So if you're looking for space, it's a great resource to check out. Or if you have space within your building that you're thinking about leasing, we encourage you to take a look at the site and list on the site if it seems like a good fit for your organization. Okay, so that's it for us. We have about 5 minutes left, and Jessica and I, we can stay on a little after the 4 o'clock end. If people have questions, feel free to submit them, and we will try to respond. Okay, so we have 2 questions. One question is, will this presentation be shared? And yes, we will be posting this webinar along with the slides on the Community Vision website under the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative section. So it should be available by the end of the week. Another question that we have is related to community cornerstones. The question is, will you need to have a fully executed lease to draw down reimbursement, or is an LOI enough to start requesting reimbursement? And for the Community Cornerstones program and for the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, in order to begin requesting funds for reimbursement, the organization does need to provide evidence that a lease has been executed. And so that is a requirement prior to being able to request funds for reimbursement. And we have another question: can you apply for multiple funding programs through Community Vision? And the answer is yes. So in this round, an organization that was eligible for Community Cornerstones could also apply for a grant from the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program. However, if an organization was considering applying for a grant from the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, you are ineligible to apply for funding through the other programs. The maximum total award that an organization would be eligible to receive is $1 million. Okay, we haven't received any more questions. We're going to stick around for about 2 more minutes. So if anyone has a question, please submit. If not, thank you all for attending. If you have questions about your projects, let us know. And we hope that we wish everybody good luck with the real estate projects that you're considering. Okay, and we had another question that came in. This is again related to the compatibility of funding between the different grant programs. So the question is, can an organization apply for community cornerstones for the $500,000 max and then apply to the Space Investment Fund for the other $500,000? And so in order to be eligible for community cornerstones, in this round, you could only apply for one program because community cornerstones is specific to organizations that are entering into leases. If you had an option to acquire the space that you were leasing, and after the community cornerstones grant had been fully dispersed, you had the opportunity to acquire, you could then be eligible to apply to the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund for an acquisition grant. If funding was awarded, that grant would be discounted by the amount of funding that was awarded through community cornerstones. But yes, at the point that an acquisition was made, if funding from the Space Investment Fund was awarded, the organization could be eligible for total funding through the initiative of up to $1 million. But it would not all happen at the same time. Okay, so with that, we're going to shut down the webinar. Thank you all for joining. We do have another application workshop scheduled. It will be similar content, but if you know of anyone who missed this webinar, that workshop is scheduled for January 8th at 5:30 p.m. It's at the Bayview Linda Brooks Burton Library, and the link to apply is on the Community Vision website. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.